In 2014, the world came to know the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, as it exploded onto the global scene with bloody conquests in Iraq and the Middle East. ISIS became legendary for its barbarism. It beheaded prisoners, forced captives into slavery, and destroyed anything that conflicted with their extremist ideology. In August 2014, the small Yazidi ethnic group would face the full force of this brutality. Today, on A Day in History, we explore a tale of slavery, depravity, and mass murder in the 21st century genocide of the Yazidis of Iraq. If the topic of this video is interesting to you, consider subscribing and checking out the other videos on this channel, and leave a like to show your appreciation. Not many people have heard of the Yazidis. After all, even the highest estimates place their global population at no more than 1.5 million, or as low as 700,000. The Yazidis are a small Kurdish ethnic group who have traditionally lived in small pockets of the area known informally as Kurdistan in Iraq, although today they also have a diaspora of a few 100,000 around the world. The history of the Yazidis mirrors that of other Kurdish peoples, recurring persecution from the numerous states and empires who have ruled over them. But despite it all, they have maintained their own communities, language, culture, and religion. This Yazidi religion is unique. They are monotheists, but not Abrahamic like Christians or Muslims, and instead, their religion draws more from the ancient Persian Zoroastrian faith. This religion has been a primary motivation for their persecution. Muslim rulers have oppressed them as unbelievers, and Yazidi persecution has not been met with the same sympathy in the Christian world that fell upon people like the Armenians. In the shadow of such harrowing tales, the importance of security and freedom, both physical and digital, becomes ever clearer in today's interconnected world. Private Internet Access, our sponsor, offers the world's most transparent VPN service with incredible benefits. Using Wi-Fi at restaurants, airports, or even at home can leave your data vulnerable. A VPN conceals your IP address, encrypts your internet connection, and PIA families to a specific state of PIA. So use They saw the Yazidis as little. When ISIS came in 2014, they saw the Yazidis as little more than demon worshippers. On August 1st, 2014, ISIS began its deadly August offensive through the Nineveh plains of northern Iraq. The Yazidis were directly in their paths, especially in the city of Sinjar. In the preceding months, ISIS had earned global infamy for their brutality, and the people of Sinjar already knew there'd be no mercy. The Kurdish militias defending the city were no match for the militants and were forced to flee. Tens of thousands of Yazidis tried to escape the city, but not all of them would make it before ISIS forces captured it on August 3rd. Hundreds of men were massacred in the following days. Those who weren't killed were sent to prison, inevitably to be executed later. The Iraqi government reported that ISIS had dug mass graves around the city and were even burying victims alive. In short, it was hell on earth for those unlucky residents trapped in the city. Fayez Farooz was one such resident of Sinjar. He and his family tried to escape ISIS, but he, his father, and brother got separated from the others and captured by the militants. The attackers marched Farooz, his father, and brother, and almost 80 other men to a nearby field, where they were made to line up for the inevitable massacre. Farooz was forced to watch as his father and brother were gunned down in front of him. In a desperate bid for survival, Farooz dropped to the ground as the shooting continued, pretending that he'd been shot. The man next to him fell on top of him, and his lifeless body shielded Farooz from the gunfire and attention of the murderers. Farooz lay in the pile of corpses for over an hour until the ISIS militants left. There was nothing he could do but run for the mountains. Miraculously, he managed to escape, but he later learned he was the only one. After getting separated, the rest of his family had been taken by ISIS, never to be seen again. ISIS forces prowled the outlying villages around Sinjar, hunting down Yazidis who remained, executing the men while taking the women and children as captives. The village of Hardan, for example, was all but wiped out when ISIS arrived. 60 men were executed while their wives and daughters were taken away to an ISIS prison to be sold on as slaves and war brides. A UN report identified a tragically vague list of villages and casualty numbers in the vicinity of Sinjar. Between August 3rd and 6th alone, 100 Yazidis were killed in the village of Khanasor, 50 in Tola village, dozens on the road near Al-Shimal village, and as many as 300 in other villages around Hardan. The report also identified an estimated 200 refugees killed by ISIS mortar fire as they fled along roads out of the region. Most of these reports were gathered from the eyewitness accounts of survivors, or pieced together when the mass graves were discovered months later. One of the single worst massacres occurred at Kocho village on August 15th. Every Yazidi male above the age of 10 was rounded up in the local school and loaded onto trucks to be taken to the execution site. As many as 400 men were executed in a single day, as ISIS exterminated the village. The surviving women and children were once again taken away as captives. The Yazidis who escaped ISIS's grasp were by no means safe either. Aside from losing their homes, communities, and loved ones, tens of thousands were forced into a dangerous, sometimes fatal, trek into the Sinjar Mountains to reach safety. As thousands fled, supplies of food and fresh water in the region simply could not sustain the influx of people. The mountainous terrain made it difficult for Iraqi and UN forces to bring relief supplies in by land or air, and the risk of pursuit or shelling by ISIS forces only made things more difficult. Within days of the attack on Sinjar, UNICEF reported the deaths of 40 children from dehydration among the refugees. Hundreds more would join them over the following weeks as exposure, starvation, dehydration, and ISIS attacks claimed more lives. ISIS's objectives against the Yazidi were not political or strategic, but religious. They believed the Yazidi were evil demon worshippers and had to be destroyed. It is this that elevates the events from merely massacre to outright genocide. ISIS wanted to destroy the Yazidis as a people, and one way to do that was forced conversion. Many captured Yazidis were given a simple choice: convert or die. ISIS proudly pumped out propaganda videos of Yazidis worshipping in mosques after promising to kill them if they did anything less. They also proudly posted videos online of what happened to Yazidis who refused. Many Yazidis stood by their beliefs in a hopeless attempt to preserve their people. ISIS targeted Yazidi shrines and holy sites, along with anyone who defended them, hoping to break their spirits. In late August, 14 elderly Yazidi men were executed for trying to stop ISIS militants destroying the Sheikh Man shrine. Their resistance was in vain, and the militants blew it up after they were all dead. On the same day as the Kocho massacre, Yazidi captives held in Tel Afar prison were given that choice of conversion or execution. According to one survivor, 200 Yazidi men chose to remain with their own faith and were promptly killed. ISIS had the same goal of cultural genocide for the women and children. The children were taken from their parents and sent away to places like Mosul, where they would be taught the ways of Islam. UN sources found some of these stolen children in Mosul afterwards, along with mountains of evidence of physical and sexual assault. Many were traumatized after watching ISIS murder their parents before taking them. Women were given less of a choice in conversion and were essentially forced to do so. Adult women were given traditional Islamic garb to wear, while men who agreed to convert were forced to grow out their beards and adopt traditional Islamic practices. ISIS made sure they attended mosques and were, quote, properly monitored to ensure they did everything right. On top of execution and forced conversion, ISIS used sexual violence, forced marriages, and slavery to destroy the Yazidis. Kidnapped women were subject to invasive inspections to determine if they were virgins. If, during their inspections, any of the kidnapped girls were found to already be pregnant, ISIS forced them to have abortions. Dozens of Yazidi women lost their children that way. One eyewitness recalled seeing her friend being taken away for a forced abortion and returning too traumatized and in pain to talk or walk. It was another component of genocide by erasing the next generation of Yazidi children to be replaced with children born from the new forced marriages. Many of these captured Yazidi women and girls were forced into marriage with their captors. This marriage was only the beginning of their torment, and the girls were often passed around between fighters to be abused. One survivor who managed to reach a refugee camp said that the ISIS fighters believed that raping a woman 10 separate times would convert her into being a Muslim. She has suffered at least a dozen separate men abusing her in such a way. Those who weren't handed directly to the ISIS fighters were offered for sale as slaves in the group's slave markets. It is thought that ISIS offered the girls for sale to make themselves popular with the young men in the areas they controlled, and make them more likely to support or join them. ISIS held slave markets in cities where women and girls were paraded around and sold to the highest bidders to act as unwilling wives and concubines. They were inspected like cattle by potential buyers in public, or sold online, with pictures of the girls, some quote, barely out of elementary school, circulated on private social media channels to other ISIS members. To the ISIS fighters, the Yazidis' religion was a good enough reason for the treatment. In a statement released by the group, they celebrated the, quote, large-scale enslavement of mushrik, idolater families, and called it the first act of its kind since the abandonment of Sharia law. In a chilling report by the New York Times, they recorded one ISIS fighter who insisted that the Quran gave him the holy right to rape non-Muslim girls. One of his child victims later spoke to Times reporters about her experience after 11 months of horrific captivity. He said that by raping me, he is drawing closer to God, she told them. Another victim offered a similar explanation about her ISIS captor. He said that raping me is his prayer to God. A few girls tried to escape, and even fewer succeeded. 18-year-old Lamia Aji Bashar was one of the few successful ones. Captured when she was just 16, Lamia was sold between multiple ISIS men, abused repeatedly, and forced to make bombs for the terrorists. After almost 2 years as a prisoner, she managed to escape with 2 other girls. It was not an easy escape though. Both of her companions, a 20-year-old woman and an 8-year-old girl, were killed when they triggered a landmine during their escape. The explosion left Lamia scarred and blind in one eye, but she was saved by a rescuer. "Thanks to God, I managed to get away," she later told the Associated Press. "Even if I had lost both eyes, it would have been worth it, because I have survived them." The Yazidi genocide was an intense, although somewhat brief outbreak of genocidal violence. By the end of August, most Yazidis had fled to safety, and those who hadn't had either been killed, enslaved, or forced to convert. The ISIS occupation of Sinjar continued until they were driven out by Iraqi and Kurdish forces in 2017. But it was small consolation for the people who had once called it home. Over 80% of those who fled in 2014 chose not to return. One could hardly blame them. The region was decimated, their homes destroyed, active IEDs littered the roads and buildings, not to mention the mass graves, each containing dozens or hundreds of their kinsmen. The returning residents and liberating forces have been discovering there ever since. For many, the ordeal continued long after 2014. Around a third of the captured Yazidi women and girls have still not been found. Some have been lucky enough to escape or be liberated by security forces, and on rare occasions, ISIS itself released them for one reason or another. But the fate of many is unknown. What little we do know is as horrifying as one might expect. As recently as 2020, the scattered ISIS militants had taken to black market organ trading, selling captured Yazidi women by parts on WhatsApp and Telegram groups, or offering the girls for ransom to their families for tens of thousands of dollars. The near total destruction of ISIS in 2019 can be taken as some sort of justice. In November 2021, one of the ISIS members who partook in the genocide, Taha al-Junaili, became the first ISIS member convicted for crimes against the Yazidi after a trial in Germany. Germany is home to the largest community of Yazidis outside of Iraq, and the legacy of what happened remains strong even half a world away. One 2017 study of Yazidis living in Germany found that almost a third of Yazidis there knew someone who'd been a victim of the genocide. In the end, an estimated 5,000 Yazidis were killed, and as many as 10,000 people were kidnapped or enslaved. In raw numbers, it might not stand out alongside genocides against Armenians, Jews, or any number of other groups. But for a community as small as those of the Yazidis, and in such a short space of time, the Yazidi genocide is one of the worst atrocities of the 21st century. And a genocide it was. The forced conversions, abortions, destruction of holy sites, and more were done specifically to erase the Yazidis' very existence. With the UN, Iraq, US, EU, UK, Israel, and more all officially recognizing the events as such, it is one of the most widely acknowledged genocides of this century. And with so many women and girls still missing, and so many bodies still to be recovered, the emotional and physical ordeal for the Yazidis is far from over.